Hey everybody, we're live streaming on the Zooniverse mobile app again today. We've done this a couple of times, so what I'll do is I'll leave a couple of links in the description to an introduction to our live streaming and some of the other live streams so you can get an idea of what's going on. I'll provide a quick rundown as to what we've been doing so far, and then today we're going to be talking about things a little bit differently than we have in the past. We've been driving on the front end and the back end feature work for a couple of live streams. Today we're going to take a step back and talk a little bit about our code organization, potentially do a little bit of refactoring, and talk about some of the concerns that come into play when we're writing code that might potentially be used or reviewed or modified by team members, potentially down the road, and how to include as much context in that code as we possibly can. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the app that we've been working on. And the feature that we have been working on together is called museum mode. So the idea of museum mode is to allow one of our projects on the Zooniverse to be visible in a museum setting. Museums are typically dark, and so the part that we've worked on together is implementing a dark theme for projects that are intended to be viewed in a museum. So let me show you an example of that. Here, we have several different projects. This one's not in museum mode, and you can see that it has a light theme. That's different for projects that are in museum mode. So you can take a look at multi-answer question test project here. These are projects in our staging environment. This one is in museum mode for this user, and you'll notice that we have a dark theme here. That we implemented largely in the other two live streams that we've already done on this application. In the meantime, I've also implemented something else for museum mode. So if you look closely at this, I'll give you an opportunity to guess what it is. Let me go ahead and restart the app. That's your first clue, is that I have to restart the app from where I was to show you what the difference is. Let's go to a project that's not in museum mode. Okay, so this project is not in museum mode. Take a look at the UI here. Great. Now I'm going to back out of this. I'm going to go to multi-answer question test project. What else do you notice changing besides the theme? So if you take a look now at our navigation bar, what you'll notice is that there is no back button on the navigation bar here, and there is no hamburger menu on the navigation bar here. You'll also notice that the bar says Zooniverse, and if you were to expand this text out, it would say do real research. This is an issue on the mobile app that we still potentially need to fix, but I'm not particularly worried about it, and this is why. Typically, when museums are displaying a project, they're going to be doing it on a tablet, which is larger, and the Zooniverse do real research string is going to be fully visible on there, whereas it gets truncated on the mobile app. But in this navigation bar, the important thing to note is that once we get into a project that's in museum mode, we cannot leave without getting out of the application altogether. This is going to be extremely important in museums because you would be amazed at the ability of, when thousands of people are going through an exhibit, you'd be amazed at their ability to get the tablets onto something that is not the thing that they're supposed to be on. So we essentially want to lock the tablet into the project that museum guests are supposed to be classifying on when it is in museum mode. And it will be predetermined by the museum what project they're supposed to be locked into, so that the only way to get out of that is to get out of the app or restart the app. And what we'll do is we'll install the tablet in some sort of physical case that prevents people from getting to the home button so that they can't get out of the application. So this navigation piece is what I have done in the meantime. And today we're going to be looking a little bit at that navigation piece. And to do that, we're going to start routing through some of the code that you and I have not necessarily seen before. This is code that already existed on the application that we modified in order to be able to modify this navigation bar. The main topic today is going to be something that I call the gradient of generalization or the gradient of specificity. And essentially, this boils down to which pieces of an application need to know about the bigger picture and which ones need to handle the finer details and not necessarily know about the bigger picture. Gradient of abstraction. I couldn't even remember the term for my own thing. Gradient of abstraction. And so the gradient of abstraction is what we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so here I have the code, and let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So to get the navigation, a couple of things happen. So inside of our code right now, we have this file called the classifier navigator. And it doesn't actually contain classes, it contains a collection of functions that we use to handle navigation for each of the different types of classifying that you can do inside of our app. By different types of classifying, what I mean is that we can have projects in our mobile app that allow you to choose between two answers by swiping or draw boxes around different parts of an image or answer a question that only takes a single answer when there are three or more options, or have a question with three or more options where you can answer multiple at the same time, choose multiple answers at the same time. Those are represented by the test project that I have on screen here, project with all mobile workflow types. I'm not going to go into it because it's in museum mode, and so I'm not going to be able to navigate out if I go into it right now. But that's what that project does. So inside of our class here, we have that navigation going on. And I want you to notice a couple of things about the way that this navigation is working right now. We have navigate to classifier here. And this is the part that I recently modified, which you can check by taking a look at your Git history. Here, I'm going to annotate my Git history, and you'll notice that a lot of changes have been made not so recently. And then relatively recently, we have this commit by me, adjust navigation to lock museum users into their approved projects. So that's what I've done here. Now today, we're going to be talking a little bit about something that I mentioned in my most recent commit, the one with the asterisk here. So in this one, I was fixing a typo, but I talk below about some of the context around the changes that are made in this part of the commit history. I'm considering whether to push the museum mode logic down into the navbar component instead of setting it at the classifier navigator.js level. I decided for now to leave them at the classifier navigator level because only the classifier pages change in museum mode, but the navbar settings are set all over the app. And a couple of other reasons that we'll get into in a second. But let me describe to you what it is that I'm talking about here. So in navigate to classifier, we're doing a couple of things. Let's go bottom to top because the top is what's relevant to us. But here at the bottom, we switch between the different workflows that we were just talking about. However, for all of these workflows, we still want that navigation bar to appear. Here's where we're doing the settings for that navigation bar. And you'll notice that there are a couple of settings available to us. I'm going to dive into this set navbar settings for page method to give you an idea of what settings it's possible for us to set in the object that we're passing in right here. So if I navigate over there, you can see here the navbar settings available to set are title, This indicates what the string title should be on the navigation bar. Show back, this is whether the back button should be visible. Hamburger menu showing, this is whether the hamburger menu for the slide out menu component should be visible. Center type, I believe this is whether the text is centered, but I haven't messed with it. And is preview. That's interesting. What do we mean by is preview? Well, I want to show you what we mean by is preview. So you'll notice here on my home screen, I have several categories: recent, preview, arts, biology, beta review. Let's take a look at one of the projects in arts to compare. This project is called Mobile Drawing Project. And when we go into the Mobile Drawing Project, you will notice that the navigation bar looks like this. It's aqua. The background is aqua, or maybe that's teal. Is that teal? Is it teal? Is it aqua? I need to learn about colors. Some designer is going to get on to me for this video for sure. Okay, so then back on the home screen, we also have this category called preview. Now, preview projects aren't going to show up for everyone, but because I'm logged in and because I have access to previewing several projects, this is something that I grant myself in the staging settings, or the project owner grants to people in production. I have access to it to see the projects that I can preview. And then when I look at a project that I can preview, you'll notice that the navigation bar is red. So the reason for this is to indicate to people while they're looking at a project itself, whether it's a project that's in preview or not. So that's what that means, but you wouldn't necessarily know what that means without having some context on the app. I also want to show you where I figure out that that's the case. So we're setting the nav bar settings for the page, yeah? And then we set our title, so on and so forth. And this is where we're navigating to the nav bar component itself. Let's take a look at the nav bar component itself. So now we're inside of a file that contains a class, a component class for React Native that displays that navigation bar. Up here, you can see that we are mapping the state to some properties for this component. We've talked a little bit about state and properties in some of the previous live streams, but here, what's important for us is to take our current state of the application and determine what the properties of this particular component are going to be. So what are we returning? Well, our properties include a user, which we get from the state of the application, a title, which is the string we talked about before, show back, which is whether to show the back button, hamburger menu showing, is preview, and center type. So now let's talk a little bit about the gradient of abstraction here. We have our navigation bar, right? And there are a couple of different levels along the abstraction hierarchy happening in these properties. So title directly affects something that's set on the navigation bar, the string that you can read. Show back directly affects what the navigation bar looks like as well. Hamburger menu showing directly affects what the navigation bar looks like, as does center type. So these are all things that are concerned chiefly with the way that this component is displayed. And it's clear when you're setting them in a place like Classifier Navigator what it is you're setting for the navigation bar. And then we have is preview. So For the case of is preview, we're doing things a little bit differently than we are in all of the other cases right now. We have title, showback, hamburger menu, showing, and center type, which are relatively self-explanatory, and then is preview, which we have to do some more research to understand. So what's happening with is preview inside of this class? Well, we have it there. And then down here, it looks like we make a view whose style includes some navbar styles and also a background style that we set based on what is preview is set to. We did something very similar to this when we were setting background colors and other theme colors for whether or not a project was supposed to be in museum mode in the other two live streams. Let's take a look at that method. So this method still lives inside of the navbar component. And here the navbar component method select background style takes in is preview and returns the preview background color if we're in preview or the default background color if we're not in preview. We can come down to the styles and see that the default background color is the header color, which in our case happens to be the teal/aqua color. Or the preview background color is something that we call test red. And it's the red color that you see right here, as well as in the headers anytime we visit a project that's in preview. So that's fine. But it looks like in our navigation bar, our gradients of abstraction are not completely aligned. We have these 4 properties at a low level of abstraction in which the navigation bar doesn't necessarily know anything about the bigger picture of how or why we want different display settings to be set. Instead, it just knows what to display. And then we have is preview, in which the navigation bar gets some higher level information about what it's supposed to be displaying and why it's supposed to be displaying that thing. Now, when I was implementing whether or not, when I was implementing the navigation changes based on whether or not a project was in museum mode, you'll notice that I did not add a property here called, I don't know, is museum mode. I absolutely could have done this. And then what I could have done was come down here and I could have adjusted the view for whether we were in museum mode or not. And what would I have adjusted on the view based on whether we were in museum mode? I would have adjusted the title, which is already a property, whether we show the back button, which is already a property, and whether the hamburger menu is showing, which is already a property too. So the reason that I chose not to add another higher level piece of context like this to the navigation bar was that the existing set of inputs indicated to me that the navigation bar, by and large, has been used in a way that expects a lower level of transfer of context transfer here. We can confirm that by looking for other places where we use set navbar settings for page. It looks like there are many places in the app where we use this method. There's the one that we've looked at so far. There's in project disciplines, right? We have it in publication list. We have it in registering, in sign in. So we set navbar settings for different pages all over our application right now. And whether or not the app or the project is in preview mode only applies to certain pages on our application. It only applies to pages on our application where we are showing an individual project. And that is by no means all of the pages on our application. The home screen does not show a project. The about screen doesn't show a project. The publication screen does not show a project. The settings page does not show a project. So there are several places where the navigation bar doesn't really need to know anything about whether we're in preview mode or not, because the navigation bar is not even on a page where preview mode is a thing. Similarly, because museum mode only happens when we're looking at an individual project, the navigation bar doesn't need to know about whether it's supposed to be displaying museum mode or not in those cases where the navigation bar is sitting on top of a page that is not showing an individual project. So that's where I'm coming from. There is a school of thought inside of programming in general and React Native specifically. I guess I should say React and React Native specifically, that states that it's important to give components contextual information and let them make their own decisions about how they're supposed to display. So what you're seeing here are a couple of different paradigms. The first one that I mentioned, I'll show you here in Classifier Navigator, where I'm setting the title, show back, and whether to show the hamburger menu based on whether the project is in museum mode. And then in the navigation bar itself, we see the other school of thought, in which a background color is being set based on the contextual information for whether or not the navigation bar is on a project that is in preview mode. So we have a couple of different gradients of abstraction happening here. And I want to go ahead and draw it out. This You'll want to fast forward through this part if you're already really clear on what's happening right now, but I want to show you this technique for drawing out code because I find this extremely helpful for me when I'm trying to understand code that I didn't write. So here, let's make a title. I don't know how to use real-time boards, so this is going to be an adventure for all of us. Let's make this text a little bigger. Yeah, not that big. Okay. All right, so we're setting the navigation bar's appearance. And right now we have Classifier Navigator. And what this thing does, what does this thing do? It navigates to individual projects. And then we have also navbar, navigation bar component, displays navigation bar. Okay. How do I move it? Oh, there we go. And then we also have navbar.js in here, which collates navigation bar settings. Okay, so these are different components right now that we've looked at so far, and I believe I can draw arrows. No, I can't. Can I? That one. Why are there two different arrow? Ooh, we can make it green. This is a learning experience. Everyone, the tool that I'm using right now, it used to be called Real-Time Board. Now it's called Miro. It's really nice for drawing diagrams. And I tried for a little while to hook up my iPad so that I could hand draw things for y'all. But it was like, it was a lot of hassle. It wasn't working. And so I've gone with this method instead. Okay, so now let's take a look at a couple of other things. So, whether mapping whether project is in museum mode to mapping whether project is in museum mode to visual changes in navigation bar. So that's one thing that's happening in our app right now. Let's make our actions, can I change their color? Let's make actions purple. And let's make classes themselves also green. I don't know if this is making things more clear. I'm open to y'all's feedback on like how to make these. That's not even the same green. There we go. Okay, so we have that. That's happening here. So we've got purple is responsibilities right now, and green is our classes. And let's make this purple so it matches. I appreciate that they don't give you like that many colors, or else I would get real confused. Okay, and then mapping whether project is in preview mode to visual changes navigation bar. So you'll notice we have two actions that are like pretty similar here. Mapping whether the project is in museum mode to visual changes, and mapping whether the project is in preview mode to visual changes. And right now what I'm doing is I'm drawing arrows between those responsibilities. Ooh, look at the curve. Yeah. Let's make it straight right now. And I'm putting arrows pointing to the part of the code where that happens. Okay. So now we have the different parts of our code, and we also have these actions that are happening. Now, let's talk a little bit about scopes. So let's make our scopes. Do I have blue? I'm not using a touchpad. Oh, I am using a touchpad. It's talking about my mouse thing. Okay. So now let's make a scope. So this classifier navigator, what is the scope that it covers in our application? Well, let's take a look at the code. Where is my text going to appear? Can I move it? Can I move it to the top? How do I move my text? This is hilarious. This is where I need y'all in the comments here to tell me how to use Miro, because I don't know. Copy style, copy link, link to, bring forward, send backward, blah, 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 blah. Oh gosh. Now what have I done? Stop. All right, you know what we're going to do for now? We're going to delete whatever this thing is that I just made. We're going to get rid of that. And we're going to put text right here. It doesn't have to be so big right now. Okay, so what's our scope? Let's take a look at the code. Now, a really quick way to determine scope in an application is to go into your class and find your main function. So here, navigate to classifier is the function that we're concerned with. Now, I want to find all uses of it. Option F7, find uses. Let's take a look at our uses here. It's used in a project tile. This is the definition itself. only a projectile. So you can take a look at the use itself if you want to. So navigate to classifier. We looked at where it's defined. Where is it used? In a projectile. What is a projectile? A projectile is a component. Specifically, it is this component. It is a tile. It is not that component. It is this component. It is a tile representing a project. Where a projectile component is used, there is always a project in play. So let's go ahead and add that to our diagram. Scope, project, tile. At this point, there is always a project involved. Let's make this a little smaller so you can. I want to try to keep the text big so y'all can see it, but I also want to have room for everything. Here. Boom. Boom. Okay, so we have our scope. Stop. Why? I don't want these instructions. Just let me struggle in peace. Stop. I'm going to regret that later. I'm sure of it. Okay. I have, hold on. I want to get rid of this. This is hilarious, y'all. Okay. Okay, and I wanted this to be blue, and it's purple. Blue. I don't know if y'all can even see. Ooh. Check it out. I can make them thick. This is awesome. All right. I'm going to get better at this. Okay, so now we have, in green, we have our code. I don't want to say component because that's a specific thing in React. Our piece of code. We have the action that is being performed in purple, and we have the scope. Okay, so let's make another scope. And we're going to be better at it this time because we know what we're doing a little bit now. Okay. Can I copy this? I don't really want. Okay. Okay, so what's our scope? Yes, I deleted the word scope to rewrite the word scope. Right. Okay, so now let's do the same thing for navbar. Okay. Set navbar settings for page. This is the okay. So set navbar settings for page. Let's take a look at where that's used. About page. Project disciplines page. Well, that's project related. Publication list, not project related. Register, not project related. Sign in, not project related. Web view screen, not project related either. Sweet. So scope. Oh, a whole bunch of stuff. How would we describe this? This is several different pages from sign in to publications to about. At this point, there is sometimes a project involved because we do have project disciplines in there. But it's certainly not the majority case, right? Can I move it up? Can I embolden it? I can, sort of. Boom, boom. This is okay. Good enough. All right, now let's make a third scope. Great. Okay. Scope. Now we're looking at the nav bar. So let's go ahead and go to nav bar. I'm going to click on my, oh my gosh. I want this smaller. Nav bar. Okay, let's find out where all this is used in the application. All right, so we've got our component and we set it. Oh, I see. So the component itself is a little tougher to look for this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to do a search throughout the app for the nav bar being defined in the JSX. And what we see is that there's literally one place where the nav bar is defined that's not in a test class. The app itself. So we are in the app.js file right now, and we see that that is where our nav bar component appears. So the scope here, the entire application. At this point, there is rarely a project involved because the app has a lot going on and only part of it is projects. The projects are the main focus, but there are many pages that do other things. Okay, so now let's talk about these actions relative to these scopes. Okay, can you see? Can I just make the whole thing bigger somehow? Boom! Money. Wait. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this diagram that we made. First, we took the different pieces of code and connected them to each other. Then we located the different actions that we have going on, and then we defined the scopes. So here we have mapping whether the project is in museum mode to visual changes in the navigation bar at a point where there's always a project involved. So we have a project-specific action happening in a component where a project is always involved. Then we have another project-specific action happening in a component whose scope is the entire application. Most places where the nav bar is used, it doesn't know from preview mode because that's specific to projects. And so it's worth thinking about how your abstractions connect to the scope of the component that you are using. The larger the scope in which a piece of code is being used, the less application-specific context it may end up needing, because it may need to be more universally customizable to all different situations that you might run into in your application. What are the real worlds like? I hate the term real world because everything's the real world. But what are the potential benefits and consequences? Well, suppose that we were to take mapping whether a project is in museum mode to visual changes in the navigation bar, and we were to move it over here. This is a particularly apposite. Let me just move things so you could see them. Suppose we did this, right? This is a particularly interesting example because if you'll recall, in our navigation bar, we already have settings for all of the things that we would change. Title, show back, hamburger menu showing, and so on and so forth. So suppose we were to add in museum mode here. Is museum mode. Blah. Okay, so now it has museum mode, and now we come down here and we make visual changes based on whether it's in museum mode. That sounds fine. A new developer joins us, right? And they want to make some change to the code. And for some reason, what they're trying to do is they're trying to change the title to on a project that is in museum mode. Okay, so they have been asked by a specific museum. Some specific museum has said, "Hey, we want to run multi-answer question test project in museum mode, but rather than saying Zooniverse do real research at the top, we wanted to have the name of the project. We wanted to have multi-answer question test project at the top, so people know what project they're on." Okay. So the developer goes in, right? And they change, uh, they do a search, let's say in our app for Zooniverse, do real research, right? And so now they're here and they change this to just project.displayName. Okay. They do that, right? So that's theoretically what we're now doing. Or maybe they do some other conditional logic that's like, if it's this specific project, put in the project name or something like that. Okay. But then in the nav bar, we've added in museum mode and we've made a visual change down here that says, hey, if you are past true for in museum mode, make the title Zooniverse do real research. This is the equivalent in CSS of marking something as important and then other developers tearing their hair out because they can't figure out why changing something in the CSS below where it says important isn't changing the attribute the way that they're expecting it to, despite the fact that we changed our classifier navigator to display the name of this or the title of this specific project. If the nav bar is taking care of that change afterward, then, even though the developer has changed to the name of the project in the navigator, Zooniverse Do Real Research is still going to show up on this navigation bar. And it's going to be potentially frustrating for them to figure out exactly where that's happening. In this particular case, not so frustrating because they can do a string search in the application. But let's say it had to do with showing the back button or showing the hamburger menu. You'd have the same override happening there, and it would be potentially difficult for a developer to track that down. So, what I think we should do instead is we should move the responsibility for making changes, for making visual changes in the navigation bar to the place where the type of navigation bar is being delegated here in the context of a project. Because this change to the navigation bar is only going to happen in the context of a project. So my recommendation here is that we move, my scope needs to be bigger. How do I enlarge? Yeah. I think we move this responsibility. Give me this arrow. Give me the arrow. Give it to me. Give it to me. Give it to me. Give it to me. This is pretty fun. Okay. Be normal, Chelsea. All right. That's what happens when I try to be normal. We're going to move the responsibility to the classifier navigator. So, what would something like that look like, right? Well, let's go into our code. Let me make sure that I don't have any lingering changes here. Yeah, let's get rid of this. And let's get rid of this because we're going to remove is preview. And this part I'm not as concerned about. All right, great. So here's what we are going to do. Inside of our nav bar, not inside of our nav bar. Boom, 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 boom. Let's open the two files we need here. Nav bar and classifier navigator. And let's do this. Split vertically so we got both our files here. Okay, so at the classifier navigator level, this is where we're always dealing with a project. And so this is where we want to make this visual change to the navigation bar, right? Okay, so we take is preview right here. We have this random, we have this like, this property that doesn't seem to conform to the gradient of abstraction that all of the other properties do. So we know that is preview here is only used for one thing. And we can check that. These are the only places where this appears in here, right? All it's doing is it's setting the color. Right? And so what we can do here is we can get rid of this. Title, show back, hamburger menu showing center type, right? What type of attribute would have the same level of abstraction as these visual ones? If we remove is preview, I would argue that what we want here is something like color, right? And for now, we can do something like that. But make sure it's working by saying, let's make it real clear. Background color. And then up here where we're doing this is preview thing, we can say, how do we set it? Let me make sure. Yeah, background color. This dot props dot background. And then we get rid of, I'm going to do that in a slightly different order. Oh, whoa. First, I'm going to set that here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of his preview. And I'm going to say background color is navbar settings dot background color. And it looks like everything else is setting a default here. And so we're also going to set a default. And our default is going to be whatever this color is that we're already using on most of them. This one. All right, so now we've got our default. Why doesn't this want to get in line? And now down here, we're going to do this dot props dot background color. Still not allowing me, it's still not auto-completing for me, which is an indication to me that something's wrong. And I think that what's wrong here is that our prop types doesn't contain it. Cool. Now my inclination would be to set the default here and not to set the default programmatically up here. But I need to look into whether and how exactly we can do that. But I want to stay on this for now. this change that we have committed together to making, who I can't find now. Let's back through all of the areas in the code. All right, here we go. Ha! Background color. Beautiful. This is no longer used. You know what else is no longer used? That. But we do need test red. Because over here, we want to do if it's in preview mode, we want it to be test red, otherwise header color. Why do we have to define header color twice? The reason that we've defined header color twice right now is that currently the default that we've set inside of navbar.js is going to apply to the navigation bar all over the application. Here, header color is referring to what the navigation bar should look like in the case of any project that is not in preview mode. Now, theoretically, could we put null there and it should work? Yes, we could. I want to leave it header color right now, and the reason that I want to leave it header color right now is that I think that would be clearer to another developer as to what's happening. I think in this particular case, we're making a trade-off between redundancy, potentially making it a little harder to change something, and a lack of clarity, making it harder to figure out, like, the one place where it's happening. I think that this improves legibility, and the redundancy makes this a little bit harder to change. So that's a trade-off that I'm aware of when I'm making this decision. Let's see how it works. Preview. So all of these should be red. Let me go down to the one that's not in museum mode. Uh-oh. Why does it look like that? Well, let's see if it looks that way. Oh, everywhere it's like this. Well, where's my default? It's possible that I set this wrong. Let's see. So we have background color here. Is this right? One way we can determine if I've set up this JSON correctly is by doing this. Does it go black when I do that? It does. So this is set up correctly. This.props.background color. So I've got everything set up right, with the exception of the fact that this is just not being set. I don't think that spacing affects. I don't think I need to import the themes themselves. Let's take a look at where header color occurs. So we go straight to header color from there. Do we go straight to header color from here? We don't. I think it doesn't know what that is here. And I bet if we did this, just out of curiosity, my hypothesis is that changing that to null is going to allow this to work, because this has access to those colors, but the classifier navigator does not. No. Interesting. So now what would happen if I were to make this oh my gosh. If I were to come down here and make this always header color. Let's change this back so we're only changing one variable at a time. It doesn't know what it is. Let's see here. Interesting. So my suspicion is that our problem is in here. Color literal. It does not, maybe it doesn't like a color literal there. No color literals. Am I only allowed to use them inside of these styles? That would surprise me. It would surprise me a lot. Let's see if this works. How fascinating. And so if that header color works there, then just setting these literals, where's test red? We're not planning on leaving this like this forever. Everybody calm down. All right. So this is great. We have our non-preview aqua. And preview is red. Or preview's not red. Rather. Oh, you know why it isn't? I'll tell you why it isn't. It's because we're setting this still here. This dot props dot background color. All right. One more, and this time with feeling. All right, so we're looking at something that is not a preview project, and it's aqua, I guess. Now we're looking at a preview project. One thing worth noting is that now our default is gone. And we have our red. So now what we need to do is set our default again, which is going to be up here. And that's this one. So we're not planning on leaving this unrefactored. Arts. We have aqua and preview. We have red, and everywhere else we don't have anything. Let's see. You know what we can do? I wonder if we can take advantage of the nature of cascading style sheets to make navbar contain this. Is that what it's called? Header color? It is. That didn't work either. So we have background color. It gets set only for projects. I suspect because we are explicitly setting our background color here, which is fine, but we do want to have a default. So now we're figuring out what happened to our default. If navbar settings isn't there, wonder what happens if we do that. Does that just make it black anywhere that's not a project? It does not. It still doesn't have anything. How interesting. This makes me wonder if any of these defaults are doing anything. Fascinating. I wonder if there's something special about background colors. Well, let's pull this. Our cascading style sheet hypothesis didn't work. Navbar, background color, this stop prop, stop background color. That all looks right. And on projects, it works, right? Yeah. But not here. Well, I do want to figure out this defaults issue. This is a separate issue. Now, that having been said, I want to make a commit here and stop for now because I want to keep these live streams relatively short. And then in another live stream, which we'll pick up tomorrow or Friday, what we'll do is we'll determine what's going on in the case of our default, which will be nice actually, because I think as many opportunities as we get to do live debugging of something like this are valuable to talk through to give more examples of how something like this might be debugged. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and take a look at our change list. So what we've done is we've taken out in preview and we have removed the input to the navigation bar that's at a higher level of abstraction than all of the others. We've done a little bit of messing around with the background colors. And then this is our Xcode proj. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a commit. Now here, I'm going to make a whip commit. I'm not going to call it a whip commit because this one I want to push up so that you have access to it. But this is where we are going to indicate that there is still a change to be made. So here's what we'll do. Lowered abstraction gradient. removed project specific, removes project, remove project specific contextual information from the navigation bar, which shows on many pages that do not contain a project. Now here, I am going to put whip. Still need to determine how to set a default color in the nav bar component for non-project pages. Set a default background color. So this is essentially creating a checklist that we'll go through in the next commit. Determine whether the other settings defaults in the nav bar component are working. Because if ours isn't working, like, are any of those working? Like, are any of these working? I want to know. Okay. And then where is, okay. And then we also want to, oh, where'd it go? We also want to make sure we only define header color and test red in one place rather than copy pasting the RGBA values. And this might mean looking a little more into that React Native warning that we saw about the literals. So now we've indicated that this is a whip, but the totality of our commit message isn't whip, right? We've indicated what we have done and exactly what it is that we have to do next. So let's make our commit. And push it up. Okay, y'all. That's going to be it for today, but we'll be back in a couple of days to see how we go about going through a list of to-dos from a previous whip commit and resolving those refactors, even if there might potentially be a time delay in between when we realize that we have a need to solve something and when we determine our ultimate solution. Until then, have a fantastic week.